Hello, everybody. Welcome back to workshop number 2 for animation, visual effects, and game production. I'm going to give people a couple seconds to roll on into this room. But welcome, and hopefully you guys enjoyed the last talk that we had, because we've got more for you in store today as we start to talk about doing walk cycles. But before that, why don't we go ahead and check in. If you guys could share your names, your age, pronouns, which high school you're going to in the chat, along with this question. Which game has your favorite art and why? So I'll go ahead and let you all take a second to do that. All right. So, oops, jumped ahead there a second. Today we'll be creating a 2D sprite animation. The objective is in the next hour to complete a simple walk cycle, an idle cycle, and a jump animation. So these are really some of the most common animations you'll see in games. And we're going to do a basic rudimentary version of this. Even if you have no artistic skill or you're not an illustrator, if you're feeling insecure, doesn't matter. This should be simple enough that even if you aren't an art person, like an illustrator, usually, you can still create something that's a pleasure to play with. Okay. So some of the tools I'll be using today, and I highly encourage all of you to follow along. I'll be using Piskel, which is a free online pixel art editor. However, if you prefer using something like Adobe Photoshop or Toon Boom or Procreate, doesn't matter. Feel free to use whatever software you find you're most comfortable with, or if you like, you can even do it analog on paper. We can make a little flip book, which is essentially the same thing that all 2D animation is. Once we finish the 3 animations that we set out to do, we're going to bring them into the Godot game engine. So this is a free open source game engine. Anyone can download it. If you prefer using something like Unity or some other software, by all means, feel free to use whichever development environment you're most comfortable with. And in addition to that, once you are in Godot engine, we'll be using the asset library project named 2D Platformer Demo with Kinematic Body. So you can download all those assets, and then we're going to just be using that to scaffold our 2D game. All right, so why don't I go ahead and jump right in to the first animation we're going to be doing. Okay, so if you notice the URL here, feel free to go ahead and go to the same site if you want to follow along. Otherwise, you can feel free to just watch as I walk us through our first basic animation. So why don't we go ahead and get started with a basic primitive shape. So nice good one in general is a good square. Right? So this can be our character approximately. It's a little off to the side, so let me go ahead and select that and then move it over just a tad. Okay. We'll give ourselves, oops, sorry about that. We want to give ourselves, I'm sorry, I'm used to using other hotkeys. You want to give yourself sufficient headroom as well as leg room and forward room, so that if you make any actions, maybe you're doing like a running animation or an attack animation or something of that nature, you might need a little more space than this on either side. But for now, since we're doing a simple walk cycle, this should serve our purposes fine. And What color should we make this guy? Any recommendations from chat? Okay, then how about we go with a sort of sky blue color. So I'm just going to fill this in. And then we can go ahead and give him or her a couple eyes. All right, we're already getting a semblance of a character here. Pretty primitive, but you don't have to get super complicated. In fact, with animation, you generally want to keep things on the simple side, both because it's very busy, it's visually distracting, but also it's a lot of work. So the simpler you keep your character designs, the more time you can actually spend on animating them. All right, so let's go ahead and name this layer body. So this is our character's body. And let's create a new layer, and we'll call this one labels. So just so I know what I'm starting with, we're going to start with the first frame of what I'm going to call the contact frame. So contact frame 1. So I'll just leave that up there, and we're going to get rid of the labels later, but this will help you make sure you don't get confused with which frame you're on. All right, and I got a new suggestion for color. So maybe green like this, maybe. How's that one, Eric? Good? Awesome. All right. Looks like my hair color. All right. So if we want to walk, make this character walk, it's probably going to need some feet, right? So we're going to start with feet. And the reason I called this frame the contact point 1 is because this is when the foot hits the ground. So if they're mid-walk, there's going to be a foot in front of them. And I'm just going to go ahead and make some sort of blob like that for now. It may look ugly, but we're going to go and clean it up in a bit. And I'm doing this on mouse rather than using a tablet pen, because not everyone has a tablet, but you shouldn't let that limit you. You can use a mouse just as equally as well. So, all right. Now, the main thing I want to make sure here, oops, and I put this on the wrong layer. This is going to be a common mistake you make a lot of. I'm going to call this feet. And I'm going to take this body. I'm going to just go ahead and select all this, copy, delete, move it over to feet. I missed that little bit there. Delete that. Okay, and then we're going to move the feet down below the body. So with the labels, this is also a good opportunity. Some tools give you overlays where you won't need to necessarily do this, but if you want to do it manually, you can sort of just have a line to show a baseline reference where you have your head animated. And then you also want the baseline essentially for where your feet are animated. So this is essentially our floor, okay? We're going to end up getting rid of this, which is why I put it on the labels layer. But let's go ahead and also decrease the opacity so it's lighter than everything else we're looking at. And so now, when we're looking at it, we can see the faint outline as reference without actually having to, giving us the option to delete the entire layer easily later for all the animation. Okay, so back to the feet. So essentially you can think of this as the moment that the heel hits the ground. And just for the sake of argument, doesn't really matter. Let's go ahead and make this his right foot. So his right foot is closer to us. So what color should his shoes be? Any suggestions in chat? Blue, all right. Some blue suede shoes, perhaps? Yeah, that's an old reference. Okay, anyways, we'll make that this blue. Actually, let's make it a slightly lighter shade of blue. And I'll show you why in a little bit. Because since this one is closer to us, we're going to give the illusion of depth by making the front shoe brighter. And then what we can do now is then just bring this value down closer to black, and then do that. And that gives the illusion of this being in shadow and thus being further away from us, since the shadow of the character's body is reducing the amount of light, right? What do you think? Does that look convincing in the shadow? Yeah, all right. Okay, so now why don't we go ahead and tweak that quick outline I did. I think this could be a little cleaner, so I'm just going to do a little bit of touch-up work. And let's see, looks a little heavy here maybe. And I'm going to try to keep this line consistent as well. So I'm going to have the feet roughly at this line level all throughout whenever they're doing the walk animation. So this or lower. Okay. So I like this. I think this is pretty good. Now, what we can do at this point is go to the next frame. So you might think at this point, okay, well, I'm just going to do a little bit of motion, right? Like there's an effect called onion skinning where you can turn the previous frame visible by clicking that little onion, and then you can sort of reference it, and then we can then draw like, oops, like maybe the foot a little further along like that or something. This would be called straight ahead animations, where you just take it one frame at a time in real time. If any of you have played Gartic Phone, that's essentially the kind of animation that you would be doing in Gartic Phone. However, we're going to be using a different method today called pose-to-pose animation, right? Or if you're more familiar with like video editing and things like that, it's essentially keyframe editing. Okay, so what that means is I'm going to find the poses that I want for sure established, and then I'm going to start filling in the details between them, right? So let's go ahead and start by starting with the down pose. Oh, sorry, not the down pose, the passing pose. So that's when essentially both feet are in the same position. So what I'm going to do is roughly outline my shoe here. And that's my front shoe. And what's happening is this foot in the back is moving forward. So what I'm going to do now is draw the back foot like right about there. And that looks okay. So now if I take the color that I used for the shadow previously here and fill this in, and then the color for the front and fill that in over here, we've now got two shoes, but this back one looks a lot thicker than it's supposed to, so I'll go ahead and do that, erase it. And so now this is essentially when the person's passing their foot in the air as they swap which foot is in front. So now we can look at it with the body and everything. So that looks not bad, right? What do we think? So, okay, if this is our passing frame, then let's go ahead and label this. Oops, looks like I forgot to copy over here. All right. I added a new frame rather than duplicated the frame, which is what I meant to do. So I'm going to go and duplicate this real quick. Oops, duplicated the wrong one. I'm going to copy these shoes or feet. By the way, feel free to throw any questions out in chat if you want clarification on anything while I'm in the middle of the talk and demo. Okay, so I'm going to now call this frame our past frame. So I'll just change that label to P1. And then I want the contact point 2. So I'm going to duplicate this frame one more time, but move it into the third frame. So we're first here, then we're here, and then now we're back here. But now that we are at contact point 2, let me change the label to denote that. So we're at contact point 2. What's the problem here? Any guesses? Anything seem wrong about the feet? Since we've now taken a step, the feet should be swapped. So we are going to go ahead and swap the colors on this. So if we take a look now, we can see the animation preview here. What do we think? Rough, but we're getting something that kind of looks like walking, right? But it doesn't look quite right. Something seems off about it, right? That's because we still have all the tweening to do. But now we essentially have the different points that we are going to be covering. So we have the full sort of walk arc, and we're going to fill in the different elements. So the first thing we're going to do here is when we lift the foot off the ground. So let's go ahead and try duplicating this. Let's see. Sorry, this changed size a bit. Yeah. Okay. Now, what we're going to do is go ahead and erase this. Turn on scanning. I'm going to put the foot right around here. Now, why did I pick this spot? Well, this is when the foot is flat on the floor now, right? So this is usually a good distinction to make, where we usually start by hitting the ground with our heel, and then we complete the step with our foot lying flat on the floor. So if we do that, then I can just sort of make my shoe like this. And then this one over here, I'm going to go ahead and move maybe a bit over like this. Probably too much, let's do it there. All right. And then what I'm going to do is lift off this foot even more off the ground. So now it's just his toes touching the ground here. And I want to angle it up a bit more. So maybe we can do like that. And there. Let's go ahead and fill this color in. Okay. So now we've gone from this to this. Okay. So now we need another frame to essentially fill in the next point. So this will be our up frame, essentially. So if you, 1 second. Want to duplicate this one. We're going to move this foot over. We're going to move this one a bit above like that. And some of it's going to be covered by the body, but that's fine. But what's not fine is when the back foot is covering the front foot. So we're gonna have to fix that. All right, so now we've got something that's starting to look a bit more like walking. Now, what we want here is something very similar to what we had before. But let's go ahead and duplicate this one now. And we're going to work backwards. So we had the foot right there. And now we're going to just move this right around there, let's say. And we're going to move this one a bit up. So now if we look at it, what do you think? Okay. Let's take a look at what it looks like when animated right now. It's starting to look a little like walking, right? But what's weird, doesn't it kind of look strange because the colors are flashing? Anyone know what's happening here? It's walking, but you see how on one of the frames it kind of looks like it's suddenly the feet just change color? That's because we have to make a full cycle where essentially we have to duplicate what we just did in order to finish and come back to where we were. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and copy these 3 frames here, okay? So I'm going to call this one up, or down rather. I'm calling this one down because the foot is coming down at the front, okay? And this one I'm going to call up because the other foot is coming up. And that's passing. And then this is our up. And then or here. So what I'm going to do now is copy this. And then you see now from here to here, it's essentially the same, but we have to change the color and swap it appropriately. So if I do that, okay. And then we're going to copy this one. Bring it here. We have to swap these colors as well. So I'm going to go ahead and swap that and swap this one. So essentially we're just repeating the exact same thing here, except changing the color. Wait, I think I made a mistake. Yeah. Um, this one needs to now be in front. Like this. So that. Okay. And then we copy this pass-through frame one last time. And now we have to swap the colors and also which one's in front. Okay. And then copy this one here. Oops, not that one. This one here. And change these colors. And then we'll have come full circle. Now you can see our animation. It's working, right? We can see his feet ambulating, and there's no color teleportation going on. So we've got the feet going, but it doesn't look quite right? Because the body isn't moving at all. So it doesn't really match with what's happening. So what we're going to do now is work on that body for a bit. And the main thing you need to know is that the head bobs up and down while people are moving. So the first frame, because it's just passing, we don't need to do anything. This is our midpoint between up and down. So here, when the foot comes down, we're going to go ahead and bring our guy down a little, except rather than just bringing him down, like if I did this, where he just comes up and down, what I'm going to do is do it slightly differently. What I'm going to do is I'm going to shrink him. So this is where you can help make your game feel a little juicier and feel more realistic. But when you start exaggerating things in slight ways, so as to sell the effect. So when you shrink something, you also have to enlarge, because what you do is you keep the same volume for the object, no matter what. So even if your character kind of gets squashed, you have to go wider, or if you get squished from the sides, you have to go pushed upwards. So I just shrunk this by 1 pixel, and now I'm going to go ahead and increase him by 1 pixel like this. Go ahead and fill that up. So now he goes from this to this. And just for extra measure, I'm going to go ahead and do the same over on this side. Like that. So he's actually gotten a little larger, but I'm just cheating it a bit. Okay. And then from here, we come back up. And then when you're here, now I want to make him taller. So I'm going to go ahead and increase him by 1 pixel, like this. But now I also have to shrink him. So what I'm going to do is shrink him widthwise. Okay, do the same over here. There you go. Okay. So we can see him now sort of going up and down. And I'm going to go ahead and make this frame the same. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this. here he comes flat again. Then when he lands his foot, now we make him flat again. As you can see, I'm not used to using a mouse, but that's fine. This is how everyone my age had to do things back in the day, before tablets were commonplace. All right, so now we've got that, and he's slightly below the line. Comes back up to the midpoint. Then here we'll elongate him again. Just a little pixel. There's this. And then... All right, what do you think? Does animation look a little better now? Feels a bit more alive, but something's wrong, right? Anyone tell what it is? Something doesn't quite feel right. Well, if you're thinking the eyes looked a little funny, you'd be correct, because essentially the eyes are not moving with the head. So when we drop down the frame, like in frame 2, we need to also drop the eyes by a pixel. Then we come back up, and then when we come up, we're going to go ahead and move it up a frame. Now, you're starting to see a bit more of a natural gait. What do you think? Looks a bit more living and breathing, right? And all we did is just move and shrink a basic shape ever so slightly. Oh, sorry, you have to go. But hopefully that was helpful for you. Bye. Okay. All right, so now we've got an infinite walk cycle. And we're going to go ahead and take this and we're going to export this. But first, why don't we go ahead and delete the labels now. We're going to export this as a sprite sheet. So if we go to PNG, you'll notice that you have a couple different choices for columns and rows. Doesn't matter too much. We're just going to keep the columns 3x4 for now. We're going to download a sprite sheet. If we open it up, you'll see now our animation is exported as one image. This makes it very useful and easy for when you want to bring it into your game engine. It's going to be able to parse this and go ahead and naturally animate it for you. So you'll notice in a little bit when we open up Godot how we're going to bring that into the game engine. But okay, so now we're going to go ahead and create another sprite. And this one should be even easier. Because what we're going to do is we're going to copy let's take this frame right here. Or no, let's keep this frame. All right. And select this whole guy. Bring him in here. We'll name this body. And then we're going to take the feet from this frame. Just as a starting point. But since he's not supposed to be walking in this one, we're going to be doing an idle cycle where he's just standing. So I'm going to go ahead and change this. Where we just have a little bit of that color poking out. Like that. So it kind of looks like he's facing that direction. Except this doesn't look quite right because his feet look like this, or this from your perspective. The wrong foot is in front. So what we gotta do is do it like this. And now this matches the orientation of the eyes. Okay, so while he's standing still, what you can do is you can duplicate this frame. And all we're going to do is have him blink a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and create the pose I want here. So the final important keyframe is going to be, let's do right around there. Like that. Okay. And then we also want him when he comes back. So here are our key points. Now we're just going to tween it. And tween is short for betweening it. So if I just make that a little bit smaller, duplicate it again. Oops. This. We've got what looks like an eye opening and closing. I'm just mirroring this on either side, right? So now we can sort of see it blinking, but it doesn't look quite natural, right? So what can we do? Well, for one thing, this is a big part of what makes a game feel good or bad, and this is timing. So we might want to keep emphasis on certain frames. For example, those poses that I did, we might want to actually keep those longer than the other frames, the transitionary frames. So for example, the starting one, I'm just going to duplicate this maybe 3 or 4 times, maybe even more, so that it lasts longer, right? Now we can slightly see it changing, right? But we might also want a little extra emphasis on while he has his eyes closed. If we do that, it gets a little sleepier each time, right? That feels a little too long, so a little unnatural, so we're going to get rid of that one. And usually, people blink their eyes closed slower than they actually open them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of one of these frames. And now we've got more of a natural blink, right? So we're going to go ahead and export that as well. And then we're going to create one last sprite. And this should be our most complicated so far, but not super complicated. And when you guys work on your creative challenges, bring all your creativity to bear. I'm doing a very simple version of 3 different animations in an hour, but you can spend as much time as you want and really, tweak it, perfect it, and make it as beautiful as you like. All right, so let's go ahead and start with the same base that we had. I'm going to go and start with the standing pose from the idle position. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this. Oops. So, all right. And I'm going to go ahead and separate these. Body. And then feet. Okay. So now we want this to jump, but we want it to have some proper feel. So I'm going to sort of think about the exaggerated keyframes that I want. So from here, what I want to do, and I'm going to actually create some labels here so we don't get lost. Just going to call this pose 1. Okay. And duplicate this. And I know that I sort of want him to be like a squishy sort of like ball or like rubbery kind of character. That's how I'm imagining how he sort of interacts with his world physically. So then I'm thinking, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to squish him down right before he launches up into the air. So I'm going to move this like that. Turn this off for now. And I think I want him also to be making a little of a strained expression because we want to give him some character or her. So what I'm going to do is, oops. So I'm going to make him be all squinty. Okay. But what did I say about whenever you compress something? The volume has to stay the same. So if we squish them down like this, what that means is I also have to extend him out. And now I'm going to distort his shape a bit. Like that. Kind of like that. Then go ahead. Fill this in. And now he looks all scrunched and ready to bounce right up, right? So when he's jumping into the air, I'm imagining a shape sort of like this, but going in the opposite direction. I'm going to now duplicate this frame up here. Bring this down. And then what I'll do is shrink him. Something like that. I almost want to make him a little torpedo shooting up into the air. So I'll give him a shape sort of like, oops, like this, roughly. Okay. So we're running a little behind on time, so I'm going to go ahead and show you an example that I made beforehand. But essentially, you want to find the perfect poses that you imagine sort of in your head first and use those as your sort of guideposts. This is the pose-to-pose animation style. And that will really help you both achieve the look that you want as well as get the timing correct. which can be quite challenging. So imagine something like this, shooting up into the air. And then you would get something that looks a bit like this. Where you can see I wanted him squished before, and then he squishes as he lands, but I wanted to rest there for a bit, and then you can see he pops out, gets a little too big, and then comes back to size, right? So that is the kind of animation that you can do very easily with just your mouse, and you can achieve quite a bit of emotion and character depth just from this. Old Nintendo games and other games from the 32 or 8 and 16 bits era had way less pixels to work with than this, and they still somehow managed to convey character. You'd be surprised at how much you can convey with just 32 colors and less than like 100 pixels. Okay, so let me go ahead and demonstrate now what you would do with this once you're done and you're happy with your animation. You've exported your sprite sheets. What you're going to do is open up a game engine like Godot or something else. So for Godot, you can see it'll prompt you like this, and there's an asset library that you can draw from. So I'm going to go ahead and use the 2D platformer demo kinetic body. And if you click this, it'll download it, and then you can save it to your project, and you can bring it in. I already did that, so I'm going to open this up. You'll see now that the game looks something like this, right? But we're going to replace this with our own assets. So the 2D platformer game's been done many times. Sometimes you don't feel like reinventing the wheel, so it makes more sense to use a pre-existing project, which is open source, and then use that as scaffolding from where you can just start putting in your assets, especially if you're an artist and you're not technically minded. That would probably be easier for you. So if you're more interested in the animation side of things, then you could definitely just work off of a pre-existing game and change out the art assets essentially and reskin the game. But if you are comfortable with the development environment, then absolutely you can feel free to code your own environment and code the animation on your own, which I would highly recommend if you have that skill set. Because that's how you make a unique feeling game. Because a lot of games use these same engines and templates, so it can often start feeling samey. But okay, so in this one, I'm going to go ahead and open up the player in the editor, and we'll see that we have some controls here. And I want to check is, oh, this is where I'm going, sprites. Okay. So if you look at sprite, you'll notice here that there's a texture here. And what this texture looks like is this. And this file, it came bundled with this project. So you can see that this sprite sheet already exists. So if you wanted to just do a straight plug and play, you could actually just replace this sprite sheet with your own sprite sheet with the identical number of frames, and then it would immediately perfectly start working, right? So you can see in this, there's a running animation with the laser out, and then the laser firing animation, and then an idle animation here, a crouching, and a jumping animation. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and change this out with another asset. And what I'm going to do is 1 second. I'm going to take the assets we created, and I'm going to copy it to that folder. So if we go to here, assets, I'm going to copy the new Piscal. we look here, there's our new pistol. And I'm going to go ahead and open that. So now our sprite sheet's in here. But let's take a look and see how it looks. Since the sprite sheet's different, yeah, we know this doesn't look quite right, right? So we have to adjust the animation frames. Right, so horizontal frames, there's 3, and vertical frames, there's 4. So now if we play, you now have an animation. And the next thing we do from here is add the jumping sprite texture or sprite sheet, and then the whatever else actions that you have in mind for your game. So if you are doing some sort of action platformer, maybe you want some wall climbing animations, or maybe you want to shoot a bow and arrow, or maybe you want to go swimming. The possibilities are endless, and you don't have to be some superstar illustrator in order to create compelling animation, because we often respond more to movement because we are kinetic creatures. So even if we have a simple object, we tend to anthropomorphize it, meaning that we project human emotions and traits onto things. So even if you are working with very primitive shapes, you can still convey a lot of emotion, and we do that through movement more than anything else. So I highly recommend and challenge all of you to create um, animations that are both more complicated than this and simpler than this, and see what you can do. For our next workshop, we'll be covering some of the different particle effects and sort of bells and whistles that you can then add to this animation that you create in order to really sell the juiciness and the game feel and make it satisfying to both control and a tactile sense for the player, as well as the visual feedback that you receive in order to get the visual response that you want for the player to experience. Okay. That essentially concludes my talk for the day. So if anyone has any questions in chat, feel free to ask them. It can be about anything. We've got about 5 minutes or so. So feel free to ask me whatever is on your mind. Okay, well, then I'd like to thank you again for coming. It was a pleasure. Hopefully you gained something from this. And I hope to see all of you next time. So tune in at the next Creative Challenge workshop. Bye.